This is the Inclusion Think Tank podcast brought to you by New Jersey Coalition for Inclusive Education, where we talk about inclusive education, why it works, and how to make it happen. This is part one of my conversation with Anjali. Anjali is a parent of 2 children who were diagnosed with autism and Fragile X syndrome. She shares what their family's journey has been like working toward inclusion in their school district. I would like to welcome everyone back to another episode of the Inclusion Think Tank podcast brought to you by New Jersey Coalition for Inclusive Education. I am back with a brand new episode. I am your host, Arthur Aston. My guest today is Anjali, and I am happy to have you on as a guest today to share your story and your family's story with us for this episode.
Thank you, Arthur.
Yes.
Excited to do this.
Yeah, thank you. So, to get started, can you just share a little bit about yourself and about your family with us?
So, my name is Anjali, and I live in New Jersey with my husband and 2 kids. I have a 10-year-old girl, and I have a 7-year-old boy. And so both of them are diagnosed with autism, and they're recently diagnosed with Fragile X. And they go to the public school in Berkeley Heights. And we are, I don't know, that's a family kind of. And what I am, if I had to say something about me, I have been a, a software professional for 14 years. Then I took a break um, after my little one. And then meanwhile, I kind of have, um, I think I've taken a lot of programs in advocacy and stuff. And then I went to school and did a graduation in special education. And so right now, that is what I have done. And I mostly have kind of done volunteering things and all around inclusion stuff. So that is that is all about me.
That's awesome. I'd like for people to share their stories from their perspectives. It's better than any introduction I could ever do. For the guests. So that's why I always try to start off with a version of that question, allowing my guests to share information that they would like to share with everyone. And as you mentioned, your 2 children have an autism diagnosis and also Fragile X a diagnosis. Can you talk about the diagnosis that your children received and the difficulty you had with getting the correct diagnosis?
Yeah, I think quite that was the biggest journey for us because getting the diagnosis was not that easy for us. Because if I had to talk about my daughter was not like she was mostly on all her milestones on time, except when it came to speech. And when she was speech delayed, we were coming from a multilingual family, kind of. I speak a different language, so and my husband speak a different one, and then we together speak a different one. So just like that way. And my pediatrician always used to say it's a multilingual family, so it's all the language delay was attributed to that. And she didn't have a lot of, I think the most thing that when people look for autism, all those diagnoses are the stereotypies, and she didn't kind of have those things. And so my pediatrician was, I don't know, were they worried or they had less information about a profile like her to have autism? And so we didn't have anything. And even my pediatrician did not tell me anything about early intervention. So we had to I found it from a colleague of mine. Then we went through that road. And meanwhile, I had my little one. After that is when my daughter got the diagnosis. Um, and and then 2 years down the line, then my son followed the same journey and got this diagnosis. But for him, he had a little more things that were kind of standing out, unlike my daughter, which just the profile was a little more different. But till 1 year, there was nothing kind of. But so Getting the diagnosis was not very easy. Maybe now I could relate to so many things because I said about the Fragile X diagnosis. I could relate some of the things because the Fragile X have a very different profile. Maybe that was one reason my daughter was not kind of. So they have a lot of autistic traits and sometimes they don't have it. So it's like a very much different one. And Fragile X, so but the Fragile X diagnosis came very like late. I got the Fragile X. They had the autism diagnosis for some time, and I got the Fragile X diagnosis only like the I think last year. So we lived with the autism diagnosis for almost 4 or 5 years, and then we had. I don't know. Does it change anything? I would not say not in a huge one, but knowing this profile would have helped about how their learning things were. So always a diagnosis, what I would see as a diagnosis is something to know them a little more better, that so that you can profile them a little more better and give them the accommodations and the learning style and help them through that way. So I felt having the diagnosis a little early would have helped me in those things. But other way, I would not say it will. I don't know for me, but maybe for someone else it would have made. But for my son, I would say there are so many things that I face difficulties, and everyone pointed it to so many autistic stereotypes that was explained well as a medical situation in Fragile X because of something like I would say there were frequent ear infections. And I felt, okay, my son could see, but still I felt that he had struggle in focusing to read. And that is sometimes explained by a condition called strabismus that is very common in Fragile X. But when I took my child to doctors with an autism diagnosis, they will always say, oh, this is stereotype. This is like something that autistic children do. It's everything was kind of, I think, bundled up in that way and said, which was explained much because now I have research papers that is stating this condition exists, that condition exists. So there was something that we can narrow down. So feel there was a lot of, so knowing a diagnosis helped that in matter, but did, I mean, if I got that earlier, it would have been better. But going through that medical process also very difficult. I mean, so I don't know. That was a process. It was quite a process, I would say. Like getting that one. They could have been even when my firstborn was kind of if they have even tested me, we would have known that Fragile X diagnosis. So I think and Fragile X is one genetic non-condition for autism because so yeah, knowing those things would have helped, and I feel still there is that lack of awareness in those areas about the diagnosis. So it was difficult. If you get to that right people, you get that one, but otherwise, sometimes it's a journey. And mine was, I would say, I always had the people who didn't know about it, but then I met someone at the later point. So that is where all our diagnosis journey was.
Yes, I appreciated what you said about, when you have the right diagnosis that leads to, um, receiving the right assistance, the right help, and to help out, help out the child with the diagnosis, the children with the diagnosis, um, and the journey that it takes sometimes to get to the proper diagnosis is, quite draining at times, I'm sure. Uh, and it's just to, just to stick with it, and how things are often grouped together, but every child is an individual, and that is what is, I think, so important to remember, that every child is an individual. And like you said, you would take your children and they would say, oh, that's because of the autism diagnosis. And then, and it's like, yes, and maybe not.
You would like people to listen to you a little more
Yes.
because and I feel like the Fragile X diagnosis, even though it's not something that I wanted, but I say it gives a little more answers. But then I feel okay, when that autism spectrum is too wide, I think some of the people might not get the right answers because it is like too big to kind of narrow down some of those things. So
Hmm.
yeah. So,
Yes. So I would like to switch the conversation just a little bit and talk about inclusion and how you view inclusion and what your experience has been, um, with having your children included in the classroom, and why do you feel it is important?
yeah. So I would say like so I tell you, I think that inclusion part thing is more narrow down into what my personality is kind of. When you ask me to introduce myself, I find I find it always struggling to say what pieces to say. So in an inclusion narrative, I would say that. So for me, even if not before receiving any diagnosis or not knowing that my children are different in their own ways, inclusion was very important for me. I didn't know the benefit of it. I would be very honest. Like now I know the benefit of it in a very research-based point and so many other things. But at that point, when initially the first place where I decided that inclusion part, I didn't know the benefit of it. I just felt that I needed that inclusion because I did not feel that my children should be separated in any means from their peers. So for my daughter, I would just kind of say as a storyline for that, it is like my daughter was in she was having early intervention, then she went to school, and she was in an inclusion classroom at that time, in a pre-K inclusion classroom. And I liked it for that part at that point because we only have an IEP and we did not, for people who don't know IEP, individualized education plan. And what it was not there at that point, she didn't have a diagnosis. So it was all well and good. We were in a regular classroom. We received all the extra support and stuff. Everything changed at the moment we received a diagnosis. That when we got the diagnosis of autism, from the previous day to the next day, what happened in an IEP meeting was that they decided this class is no more right for my child. And something that um, something that I was not prepared for. I have heard stories, but I didn't know anything. When that first meeting, I still know that how how ignorant I was about the system and how it works, kind of thing. And when my child was asked to move to a classroom, she was 4 years at that point, and it was so difficult for me. And only difference was, I always tell anyone I say that it's only difference was getting a diagnosis. And that time they said, okay, your kid would do better over here. So there is a lot of discussion that happened that something that was right for my child changed overnight. The educational situation changed, like they cannot learn anymore in this class, everything just changed with that. And I remember like some of the things that I always look at the LRE, that is what is in our code, saying that okay, the use of supplemental aid and services, kind of a thing. And I remember taking my code book, printer of my administrative code book, and talking to them that hey, we can do all these things. But I would say that at that time I didn't know well to explain that much, but I know that this could exist. But at that time that conversation didn't go well. It was all everyone making me believe that this is not right anymore. And at that point, inclusion was very important for me because I felt if she is a child who talk less, does not have that language, why would you put her in another place and where everyone is learning to speak or talk? Why would you put them in an environment there, not among the people who have more um, like language and stuff from them so that they can learn? So it was like a different, the what you kind of say, right, that logical sense of you doesn't accept that part, that it doesn't make sense to me whatever you're talking. Okay, maybe other than your experience of it, but nothing makes sense to me. So for me, that inclusion, that benefit of inclusion, what I was thinking is you always have appropriate peers to learn from. You always have a situation, and also your comparison of learning. We all say everything is relative. So for you, it is related to what everyone else is learning. Maybe your pace is different, and I was okay to accept. It was not like not being unrealistic, but it was okay if my child learns little slower. I was okay with it, but I just didn't feel, why will you still not be teaching them the same things? Why would you kind of think there is a separate classroom would work? So for me, inclusion was important like that way, because I was always seeing things through how how the reality of our world is. Like me, if I'm considering myself as a person without disability, and how would my reality be that I am in a real world doing stuff and kind of doing, then why would my child be not able to do that, or why would my child be not taught to do that? So for me, it was just experience, that you need to experience the same things even though your experience feels different, and that is how every one of us are. Even though if we are with disability, without disabilities, our experience are different. So for me, that inclusion, that is one reason why that inclusion was so important, because that was closest that you are going to be to real reality, or real life, what we call, or real experiences, what we call. So, and what I see as benefits is like what all of us think of, like that's the same. Even my children with disability or without disability, this is what I would kind of want them to be: independent, get a job, do their own stuff. And if you have to navigate all those things, you have to be among that. You need to have that experience of it, not in a separate place, because if you have all those separate experience, how will you bring it together? So so those are the things, and I feel it's common sense. Those are the things that you see as benefits of. You don't have to have a research, or you don't have to have, like, people writing papers about it. It's just a common sense that this is the normal experience that people should be having. So I think that is what I want. And now I would say, as a fear of a parent, like as a because I have two children with disabilities, it is that when I'm not around, they should be able to navigate. And I feel if they're not included, uh, I don't think they will know how to navigate. So these are all benefits, and I think they overweigh everything what people think of. So yeah, that is why inclusion is very important for me.
I loved what you said, and I was holding on until you were finished to respond.
I
That
can talk a lot about inclusion. So
it was so great, though. I love what you said, that they should have the same experiences, although our experiences are different. Like they, oh gosh, that was so good. I really enjoyed that. We have to, and I love the thought that you said about, for a child that is, not expressing themselves language with language. Why wouldn't you put them in a class in a position where they could possibly learn more language from their peers? And that is, wow. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so true. And something I never thought of it in that way. That was like so well said. I really appreciated the breaking it down in the way that you did. That was great. I was like, yes, that was so good, so important to mention. And again, like like all parents, you want those same things for your children, and like you said, for them to when you're not around, for them to still be able to navigate and experience the world and things around them when you're not around. That is, that's the wish for every parent and for every person. I think that that our children and our loved ones can really experience the world and get around in a world where even if we're not around. That's so well
yeah,
said.
because seeing them around, this is just how kind of would add that part. It's like the first place kids are like people are like, everyone see each other is school system.
Hmm.
So if they see that in a school, they are young, they understand, and they grow with it, kind of a thing. And then and these are the kids. This is like this way, right? We are kids, then we become adults, and it is like that is that cycle of life. So I feel as young as kids, they should see, they should know how to be, that is with disabilities or without, the people without disabilities should see them, to see how different they are or how different they think, and we are all different in our own ways. So I feel it grows together, like we kind of, that is what we are as a society, right? That like we have to kind of, that neurodiversity should be there, kind of. And if we are not seeing them as adults, I have still people who don't know how to respond when we talk, when I talk about disability of my kids. That is because that is not the norm. People become uncomfortable, and that I feel, right, we, if we normalize those conversations, it will become normal. Like in, it's plain. I always bring that common sense in it. That is, that is what is the importance of inclusion, that we feel that is, it is normal to be different.
Yes, it is. And like you said, we're all different. We all have different experiences. And, um, the earlier that we can the earlier we can experience those differences, it makes it better for, as you said, when the children grow up to be teenagers, when they grow up to be adults living out in the real world on their own and their places of employment, in college and beyond. It really is, the earlier we can make this happen, and the earlier that the younger children can can experience diversity and differences, the better the world will be. It's so, I'm so glad you took the time to really break it down as you did. That was really, really impressive. I really appreciated that. So what are some important messages you would like to send to teachers and to school districts in general about children with an autism diagnosis? This concludes part one of my conversation with Anjali. Join us again in 2 weeks when our conversation continues and Anjali shares advice for school districts on how to effectively include students with an autism diagnosis. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and don't forget to follow us on social media at NJCIE. Until next time.